wanted to talk today about gaming in the 60s and 70s. Give you a little bit of detail about myself and sort of learn about me, and then you can tell me about you in the comments and we can all develop. I mean, I started playing games, war games, in the 60s. I didn't think they were war games at the time. I thought I was playing with Tim Poe and Britain's cowboys and Indians and knights in armour, things like that, cavalry. But I was interested in the American Civil War from primary school. I wrote a story, my mum still got it, when I was 6, about a haunted Confederate fort. I thought it was a great novel at the time. It turns out it's like one piece of paper folded over. But hey, you know, I was 6. The idea of playing with soldiers was in us all, isn't it? I think. And we had Airfix soldiers because that's what we had in town. We went into town, there were no war game shops. We had model shops that sold Airfix kits and Airfix soldiers. The first soldiers I got were Robin Hood's men, and my brother got World War II Russians, which made it quite difficult to play with each other, if you'll pardon the expression. But then Airfix brought out other ranges, so we had astronauts, and we had Sheriff of Nottingham, we had Wagon Train, and then they brought out lots of World War One, lots of World War Two, and we have the aircraft and things. And gradually, I think we sort of gravitated towards World War Two, partly because of Airfix, partly because a lot of us had parents back in the day who'd been in the army, who'd been in the war. My dad went over to France on D-Day +3, and he fought right through the war until he was invalid at home. He wasn't hurt by the Germans, he was run over after the war by a drunk American soldier in a big lorry. He said the Germans couldn't kill him, but the Americans only spent 20 minutes running him over. So a lot of us had parents who'd been in the war, and the war wasn't that long ago. And when I was born, with 12 years out of war, we still had rationing. Not that I knew much about it being that little, but it was there. So we had parents who could talk to us about things. The excitement came when things started to happen, like Airfix brought out Napoleonic soldiers, War of Independence. And so the first proper war game I had was with my best mate, Andy. And up in my bedroom, I had a brown carpet in hexagons, and each hexagon was bordered in green. And what we said, we didn't know about wargaming. So we said, you've got to, you advance a hexagon at a time. If the enemy are in the hexagon, we throw a dice. Every 6 is a kill. When you've got twice as many troops as they have to leave the hexagon. And they can bring troops up and reinforce, but generally speaking, that's how it works. And they had artillery behind that, and we had some cavalry. Andy definitely had cuirassiers, but I don't know if the British had any cavalry, I can't remember. But when we moved on to the bigger scales, like what I would call 54mm, Airfix did a lot of those, but they were nearly all World War II. I do remember some Napoleonic soldiers. They were pale blue, and they were all sort of stood at attention. There might have been one advancing. Were they Airfix? Can somebody remember? I don't know. Put a comment. Tell me. And similar Britons did cavalry, didn't they? Confederates and Union and so on. Tim Poe did all their stuff. They did Crusader Knights and things. So there were other things you could do. But we liked the Airfix. And then we watched a big breakthrough. We went to see Christopher Plummer, isn't it? The guy who's in The Sound of Music. The heroes are alive, etc. And Rod Steiger in Waterloo. We went 7 times. We went every night, 7 nights. Because in them days, once a film finished, like in Donny at the Gaumont, That was it. It was 7 years before it'd been on the telly. You couldn't get DVDs. There were no internet. That was gone. Vanished. You had to remember it in your head. So that was a sort of big awakening. Then we found out what Napoleonic Wars. We went to the library and started studying Napoleonic Wars. And then my brother and I went to a War Games Club in Doncaster. It was at the YMCA. And we went in with my dad, because he'd organised it all. This was 1972, I think. And there's some guys playing 3,000 scale, I don't know, little tanks, little micro armour. And they were doing 6-day war. Egypt and Israel in the 6-day war. And they had jets, flew across dead quick. And the other guys were playing Napoleonic, Hinchcliffe. So I started to get Napoleonic. And one of the fellas said to me, look, we play club games where we all get together. What we don't have are any Prussians. With loads of British, with loads of French. If you're going to collect something, get Prussians, because no one's got any. So, I'll do that. So I got Prussians. And one of the guys at the War Games Club, he worked at a shop in town, which was called the Stamp Corner, and he did stamps and coins. But they started to do soldiers, Hinchcliffe. And eventually it got so popular, downstairs they opened the basement as a war game shop. I couldn't afford to buy a lot of figures. So what I'd do is I would tell the guy, I'm doing Prussian line infantry, please. This is the Hinchcliffe catalogue number. And he'd say, right, we'll get some of them in. And then on a Wednesday, my mum went to town. And when I was at school, I said to my mum, go into the Stamp Corner, nip downstairs and tell them you want Galen's Prussians, and they'll give you 4, which was my pocket money. I think it was 25 pence each, maybe about £1. So I'd spend all my pocket money on them. And then by the following week, I'd have painted them, and eventually I ended up with a regiment. We had 13 a regiment. And then we had 27, and then a standard bearer and a drummer and a lieutenant officer. So we ended up with that, and then I got a gun. So with that, slowly you build up your units. And then one day, went in, and these guys were playing with elves and goblins and dwarfs, and I went, wow, look at that. And my brother had been read The Hobbit by his teacher at primary school, and he spoke so enthusiastically about it. I read it, I was at secondary school, and I fell in love with The Hobbit. Just fell in love with it instantly. It's a no-brainer. My book, perfect. And I said to these teenagers, you're playing The Hobbit? And they went mental. Well, it's Lord of the Rings. I'd never heard of Lord of the Rings. So I scuttled off and got Lord of the Rings. It had maps. It had everything. And then, where'd you get your figures from? Miniature Figurines in Southampton. Oh, how'd you do that? Well, you send for a catalogue. So I did that. And then what we used to do in the 6th form at school, no, actually with the 5th form, because we weren't in the 6th form block, we were in the 5th form common room. And we'd pull together, all the wargamers, and we'd buy a copy of the catalogue. And it'd come, and we'd scour through it. And we'd make our orders, and you had to fill in a big order sheet, and you had to tear it out of the magazine and send it off with, your postage was loads of stamps stuck on an envelope. I think you have to wait the excitement of them coming. Brilliant. But the figures changed. It was so exciting wargaming back then. I would argue, I'm arguing this, wargaming was more exciting in the mid-70s than it is now, because things were all new. Everything was new. Like I did minifigs fantasy. I didn't know about anyone else's fantasy. I only knew about minifigs because the guys at the club were playing it. Never heard of it. I didn't know about different scales. Nobody in my club were playing them. They're all playing 25mm. So I didn't know. It wasn't like going through the internet or watching YouTube things like you're doing. Think on. You knew it or you didn't know it, and I didn't know it. I didn't know about War Games magazines. I did later on get a few War Games books, but I didn't know. I knew minifigs. So I ordered minifigs, and I like elves, so I ordered minifigs elves. But they were changing things. So if you go back through these YouTube videos, you'll see I've shown quite early on. I think it's called something like "I Knew the '70s Were Great" or something. It's the first one with a proper thumbnail, and I'll show you the original Giant they did, and then the second edition Giant, and how much they change. And similarly with, for example, dwarfs. Originally, you got halflings, hobbits. You got three teeny weeny little hobbits, boop, 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 and tiny little swords, and they were all joined together on one strip, and you had to snip them. And the dwarfs came in twos, and one had an axe over his head like that. But his hair was tiny, and his hair was like a sort of continual sort of perm round his face into a beard, a big fluffy beard, and a little teeny weeny face in the middle. There are no features really. I suppose there must have been, but I can't remember there being many features. But then the second lot of dwarfs they brought out were super duper mega dwarfs. But I remember opening the catalogue and seeing dwarves with mattocks. I nearly wet myself. It's fantastic. And there were no rules. So we had to make up our own rules. Everything was exciting and new and up for grabs. Now, you play a war game. I did an English Civil War game a couple of months ago for gamers all around the county. And the one question I was asked constantly was, whose rules are you using? Mine. I'm not using anybody else's rules. And people go, oh, I like them rules, them two fat laddies, pike and shot, osprey. They're all younger than me. The people that write those rules aren't as old as me. They are not as experienced as me. They don't know what I know. So why are my rules any less valid? But I think the whole process of not knowing what figures were coming out, not knowing there were other figures, it's like turn around every corner as an adventure. We painted with enamel paint. It was years before we discovered acrylic paint. I didn't know how to paint with acrylic paint. I got an Eldar, and I looked at him and I thought, I don't know what to do with that. Mental. We used Humbrol. I remember in Woolworths one day, me and my mate Andy went in and they'd got new paint, green leather, raw linen and cotton. The number of my figures who started wearing green leather, raw linen and cotton was obscene. So anyway, that's my argument for the 70s were very exciting and I loved them. And I think we were more fortunate, even though our choices were limited, because that limitation made it more exciting. You know, a bit like I was saying, I was born just after the war. Sweets were rationed. Therefore, if you got a sweet, you went mental. People got a banana or an orange when I was a kid. You'd have thought you'd have given them crown jewels. Now, you give a kid an orange for Christmas, watch his face. Anyway, there ends tonight's sermon. And I would just like to say that we'll close with a hymn. Hymn number 462. Oh Lord, I have never wronged an onion, so why does it make me cry?